Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Blaine Johnson from the University of Chicago, and thanks for Deb and the committee for having me here today. So today I'm going to be talking about a framework for accreditation, accelerated international perfusion education credentialing. And I'm really excited to kick off the international perfusion session. So you may be wondering, Blaine, where did you figure out how to get reciprocate out of here? So reciprocal licensure generally allows candidates holding out-of-state or out-of-country licensure to earn a license in a receiving state, usually subject to meeting that state or country specific requirements. Now, reciprocity agreements allow for states to work through variations in licensing systems and can coordinate license transfers to fill vacant positions with qualified candidates. Now, I have no disclosures, but today we're really going to look through and discuss the trends in perfusion education. We're going to review the ABCP eligibility. We're going to evaluate the feasibility of international accreditation and address the impact of that compact licensure may have. But ultimately, I want to really explore how perfusionists can advocate for change in the perfusion profession. So this question really came from a few years ago when I started my work with the Government Relations Committee with AMSECT. We had institutions, companies, and individuals coming to us and saying, hey, you know, I'm a perfusionist in another country, or we have needs in other countries. How can we fill these vacancies? So we really sat down. I talked to, content experts and stakeholders like Deb and others, Anne in the profession, and we really, wanted to create a pathway or an idea of a pathway that can address these shortages that we see. As far back as 2019 was the last published one by Colligan, and then we see Sarah's group looking at perfusion education. But really, we still have a shortage, I think, in the United States. But let's see how that compares to education. Now, what's interesting about our 23 now education programs, that's grown about 5 to 6 programs over my past 5 or 6 years. And we have 2 new online ones as well. But the interesting part is you see a lot of geographic disparity, right? So Texas has the most certified perfusionists with 409. You see they have 3 programs, right? The next following is Florida with 365. Well, unfortunately, Barry closed during COVID years, so no programs anymore in there. And then California is about to have its first program come online in the next year. So those are the top 3 programs per capita, and we see a lot of geographic disparity compared to other states as well. So I hope you all read your annual report every year. It's really important. They put a lot of thought and time into presenting both a quantitative but also a qualitative analysis of the year. But let's see what that means for the numbers, right? You may notice that there's always a chart of the last 23 plus years of data. But what does that mean for like new versus lost? So if we graph it, right, you'll see that generally speaking, we don't have a shortage. We are keeping up with our perfusion education, but also seeing a decrease in lost applicants. And this moves over time over the 23 years because overall we're always having more and more licensed perfusionists. But again, like how do we answer that question of how can we advocate for change and bring other qualified individuals in to meet the needs of today? We have, big technologies on the forefront of our profession right now with ex vivo organ perfusion, NRP, ILVP. And we need to take a stance as a profession, in my opinion, that we are the content experts that should be doing these. Because if we, say that we cannot meet these standards, then they're going to go to other healthcare professionals, similar to what we saw in ECMO many years ago. So I started with the framework that Australia has. They have an overseas trained perfusion policy, and we kind of move through that as well. So I'm going to start with, how does this all work, right? And we're going to go through the process. I'm going to tell you the different standards and then some of the ideas that we've come up with on how to build a framework around what works in the United States today while meeting the need. So some of you may be wondering, how did I become a perfusionist, right? No, I'm just kidding. But it's important to understand the standards, right? I always give a talk to high schoolers, and this is my slide. So I thought it'd be important to start with, you see all those different organizations, right, that contribute to our profession. But it's also, let's hone down more into a detailed of what are the big education certification organizations. This is important to understand, especially for our new grads here as well. So we have CAHAP, right? We'll start with them. They're the Commission of Accreditation on Allied Health Professional Programs. So they are the programmatic secondary accrediting agency recognized by the Higher Learning Commission, and they carry out accreditation activities for over 25 different allied health professions. Interesting about their history is they were started by the AMA and then off-taken many years later to kind of become their own accreditation body. So they're kind of at the top of perfusion education and credentialing. We follow that with ACPE, which is the Accreditation Committee of Professional Education. Now they're what we're call a COE, right? So what's interesting is, although CAHAP is the tip top of the section, they realize that they need stakeholders to provide content and expertise on what's going on today. So they rely on those expert panels, which is allowed by ACPE. Now they're the ones that go and do site visits, they approve accreditation, so on and so forth. And then of course we have the American Board of Cardiovascular Perfusion, which you're all hopefully familiar with, and if not, I hope you do familiarize yourself with, because they are the leading experts in credentialing for our nation in the United States, right? So the ABCP was founded in 1975, and their primary purpose of the board was to establish essential function in protection of public through the establishment and maintenance of standards in the field of cardiovascular perfusion. So what are those standards that we talked about? So again, you can see on the side there that there are many organizations that go into these standards, right? Professional organizations like the STS, the cardiovascular anesthesiologists, but also content experts from AMSECT and the board as well. But one thing I really want to hone in here are the responsibilities of the sponsor, right? So the sponsor is your organization that's coming forth and saying we need education. So for instance, Texas Heart Institute is the sponsor. So the sponsor must ensure that provisions are met for the standards that are outlined in the 19-page document. But they also must ensure that graduates of the program have obtained or will obtain a baccalaureate degree upon completion. And now they say they also prefer a master's degree, but that's not a set standard yet. So what's interesting here, right, is that how do we determine degree equivalency for those who are outside the United States? We have to do it in a non-biased way, right? So one way is to work with WES, which is like industry standard nowadays. A lot of education programs throughout the United States are using these content experts. Number one, to provide an unbiased opinion, right? You never legally want to determine degree accreditation and the board comes back to you and you say, well, we felt like it was best, right? What's really interesting about WES is they have experts in these regions. They know the different accreditation bodies and standards there. And they also have like boots on the ground who can help provide authentication and also validity of standards, right? And they're really committed to supplying licensure boards with support, training, and resources that they need in order to establish the best practices. So what about curriculum, right? What's interesting about curriculum requirements is they must either be met prior to perfusion education program or presented as a coursework. They may include, but not limited to, college level consistent prereqs. The student's involvement, obviously, in cardiopulmonary bypass should include, but not be limited to, case selection, preoperative preparation, etc. But we also see that there's case requirements as well, which we're going to outline here in a second. So how do we sit for the board exam, right? This is another key background point that we should examine. So obviously we know we must be enrolled or graduated from an accreditation body. Now this doesn't include the grandfathered individuals prior to April 1981. But in addition, we must also document 75 cardiopulmonary bypass cases, but the biggest change that's going to go into effect in about a month is that moving forward, all 75 cases for the PBSE must be completed within the United States, U.S. territories, and/or Canada. Now, it's going to be a big game changer, I think, in the future, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second. In addition, after sitting or qualifying for the PBSE and submitting all documentation, you're also going to sit for the CAPE, right? What's interesting here is that they have not recognized that these cases must be done in the US, so it just says basically that 40 independent clinical perfusionist cases after graduation should be completed. So more so onus on the perfusion education aspect rather than gaining experience in the United States is what we see so far. So let's kind of build that out with a sample curriculum, right? So if we're going to bring individuals into the United States, we want to make sure that A, as we talked about, they have a baccalaureate degree at the end of their education. B, they have to go to an accredited perfusion education program. And C, that they meet their case requirements, right? So how can we do that? Many of you may notice this curriculum because it's the old Texas Heart curriculum of a 12-month standard. But I think it's really interesting because what if we can fast track or provide an accelerated education to meet these international standards, to bring them up to par with American perfusion in the United States, but also meet the standards, right? Rather than going through loopholes or doing, things that aren't really within the guides. So we see here 75 cases, 10 must be pediatric observations, and moving forward, 5 must be ECMO or VADS. So another thing, that I think is really important to hit on too, which is, again, Australia really hones in on is language requirements, right? So, Dr. Gottlieb was here earlier, and she always talks about the triangle of trust, right, during coronary bypass. And the best part of that is the communication that goes between the individuals to provide that patient-centered care, right? So really in our framework, I think it's really important to consider that candidates that are coming to the United States and that may be sitting for this accelerated program definitely have English proficiency. You can kind of see there what Australia standards, but at the end of the day, they say that a minimum English language competency is necessary for safe and effective perfusion practice. So now that we've talked about our requirements for education, our requirements for language and other things, how are we going to get these individuals into the United States? So usually it requires visas or sponsorship from their company or community or even country. We see here a few different types of visas, including specialty occupations, exchange visitors for education, but I also want to hone in on the professional education and visas as well. What's interesting about this is it actually started in 1994 with NAFTA and was overturned in 2020 and became USMCA. So what's interesting about this is it's a pathway built for healthcare professionals within Canada, United States, and Mexico to share healthcare professionals and labor initiatives. But the sad part about that right now is that perfusionists are not entitled as a healthcare professional, right? Many others are, but this is one thing that actually we're working with the GRC to lobby some federal senators and representatives to add perfusionists to these visa types. So another thing on the horizon as well is CAHAP International Accreditation. So again, we said that they are the tip-top accreditation body. So they've actually created a pathway that's been published over the last few years on how they think international accreditation processes should work, right? So this may be an example like University of Chicago has a strong affiliation with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, right? Or Cleveland Clinic, right? They have an international accreditation as well, and others who do pharmacy residency and other things as well. So, the future may be, what if we have an accredited body of perfusion in another country? Now, what we saw obviously before is that right now we're not able to do that because of those case constringent requirements that they've put. But this is a pathway that we may explore in the future. But at the end of the day, the decision to review programs outside the United States is at the discretion of each professional committee on accreditation, i.e. ACPE in this case. So what's another way, that we can look at this as well? So compact licensure agreement, I usually talk about for government relations, but if you all drove here this morning, you all have a compact license. Your driver's license is one of the best known and examples of compact licensure, right? So what does that allow you to do? That basically says that a single state has determined you to be of certain standard, and that when you go into these other states that you meet their standards as well, right? Without submitting documentation or going through and getting a driver's license in any other state you may drive in. So we could do that in perfusion as well. The kickback, though, is that in order to be supported by the Council of State Governance, which is supported by the Department of Defense and some funding, we need at least 30 licensure states. Unfortunately, right now we're at 19, so 18 licensure states, one titled state. The first licensure state being Texas, so that's great. But we need to continue to advocate for change and increase the licensure as well. You can see there on the graph again, we see a lot of geographic disparity in where perfusionists are, but also where licensure is as well. So what's a quick roadmap to advancing the perfusion profession? I do this, for licensure, but we can do it for international accreditation and international standards as well, right? So we're going to get involved in our state. Remember, at the end of the day, the lowest form of determination is your standards and policies at your institution, followed by local and state standards, and then over that is federal standards, right? So we can seek licensure in different states, create a compact, and hopefully work with our international partners to open and allow discussions that can hopefully increase the perfusion practice throughout the United States, but also do it in a safe and mitigated way that we can do it to meet our standards that we have today. Thank you for your time.